Hello everyone and welcome to the MMA Cycles weekly market update video. This is Gianni DePoce and it is a pleasure as always to be with you all. We had a pretty eventful week in many markets. We saw some midweek volatility during what we call the Sagittarius factor days. We saw some quick, sharp reversals, but an eventual resumption in many of the trends that were existing going into this past week. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. We can look at a chart at the S&P 500. We had breaks of key technical resistance in a couple instances. We had Venus squaring Uranus on March 19th. And whenever Uranus is involved, there tends to be a break of support or resistance levels. We also had Mars square Uranus on March 23rd. So a couple Uranus aspects highlighted there. Uranus rules tech stocks, but again, also has to correspond with breaks of support or resistance. And with the Mars aspect, we saw some meaningful moves in many steel stocks and mining stocks. They broke to new multi-year highs as well. So that was basically what happened in the equity indices this past week. But the short-lived volatility that we saw in the middle of the week happened when the moon transited through Sagittarius. And we call that the Sagittarius factor day. And it was in the middle of a pair of conjunctions. We had Mercury conjunct Jupiter on March 21st, and then we had Mercury conjunct Neptune on March 23rd. So that translation with Mercury highlighted, the mutable signs, that the mutable sign being Pisces, and then we had the moon in a mutable sign as Sagittarius. So some mutable energy in the middle of the week, short-lived volatility, but eventual resumption of the uptrend. But I do want to show the NASDAQ as well, because the NASDAQ had a pretty decent week. It was leading the market lower for much of this year, but it had a pretty strong rally, closed near the highs of the week, which is a pretty optimistic sign. But with the Uranus aspects this past week, it was good to see some short-term resistance break. So we will see whether that can hold going into the following week. And as we look at the Dow Jones, similar story, ended on a very positive note to the week and closed at a new high following the low that formed on February 24th. So as we look at the week ahead, the main aspect on our horizon is the Venus Saturn conjunction on March 28th. So Venus rules grains, Venus rules currencies. We had some big moves in currency markets. It's definitely worth starting off by looking at the dollar yen, which exploded to a multi-year high. Let's go ahead and look at the weekly chart here for context, and it may not even be enough. No, it's not. We have to look at the monthly chart here. The dollar yen is now at its highest level since December 2015. And this rally happened within, reasonable proximity of the Venus-Uranus square and the Mars-Uranus square, but we really saw it start to accelerate around these aspects. The breakout happened earlier in this month, but we saw the acceleration and breaks of other meaningful levels of resistance, especially in this 118 area that happened. That was the high from back in 2016, late 2016, early 2017. So that, again, showing the importance of geocosmics and their correlation to markets. So that's really the big aspect on the horizon next week. So we could look for some potential reversals in currency markets, but it's also worth taking a look at the yield or the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury, because that broke out to multi-year highs as well, which means that T-notes, the 10-year Treasury note, fell to new lows. And this also happened during a period where Venus squared Uranus. So again, whenever currency markets move, bond markets tend to follow, interest rates tend to follow. So we saw a big breakout in the interest rate market unfold this past week as well. And so it's also worth taking a look at Bitcoin, because we know that with Uranus in the sign of Taurus, there is a lot of talk in terms of innovation and revolutions happening with respect to blockchain and cryptocurrencies, because Taurus rules currencies. And so we had a pretty strong performance by Bitcoin this past week. It's pressing up against some pretty key levels here that we talk about pretty extensively in the MMA cryptocurrency reports. We have a daily report and a weekly report as well. But we would look for with the Venus-Uranus square aspect this past week for some important breaks. And we did clear some short-term resistance levels, but now with the upcoming Venus-Saturn conjunction, we'll have to see whether this rally is sustainable or not. We will likely know by the end of next week. But I also want to highlight that on the 28th, the same day that Venus will conjunct Saturn, we have the moon transiting through the sign of Aquarius and making conjunctions to Venus, Mars, and Saturn all within the same day. So it's just the moon making those conjunctions. And so with Aquarius, the planet that rules that sign is Uranus. Don't be surprised if we see some high volatility next week, not just in cryptocurrencies, but to start the week, could see some wide fluctuations in prices because we saw a lot of moves this past week as well. And I actually want to take a moment to highlight another sector of note that put in a very strong performance this past week, and that is the cannabis sector. This was a sector that we covered previously in the International Cycles report, the ICR report. And this was a pretty downtrodden, beaten down sector, but it put in a really impressive performance this past week. And it just makes us think as analysts and, analysts with respect to the markets and geocosmics, whether the conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune that's approaching in about 2 weeks time, 3 weeks time on April 11th is going to have an impact on the cannabis sector. If this past week's price action was any introduction or foreshadowing any important developments, it would lend credence to that idea, because Neptune rules drugs, alcohol, any type of medicinal items, and Pisces does as well. So we already have Neptune in Pisces, and with Jupiter in the mix, when that conjunction is coming, perhaps there are some major federal or statewide legislation on the way that could really act as a tailwind for the cannabis sector. So definitely something to keep an eye on as we approach the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in early April. So that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover for this week. Let's see if these trends continue into the last week of March, the last week of the first quarter. We will have Ray Merriman joining us next week on this weekly video. It will be published either on April 1st or April 2nd. And then I also want to share with you that we will have the second part of the MMA market updates. The webinar will be on May 8th. So stay tuned for that. You can find all the details for those events and similar things at MMAcycles.com. We also have a variety of other very insightful and important reports that cover a nice plethora of markets, so to speak. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you next week with our next update. Thank you.